even the person who's not doing so well, they can have a turnaround too. So it's really looking at human resources differently, not through rose-colored glasses, not through the bad experiences that you had, but through a totally different lens of inclusion and belonging.
Welcome to Get Unstuck and On Target, the weekly podcast that offers senior leaders insights and strategies to not only lead with confidence and vision, but also to achieve groundbreaking results. I'm your host, Mike O'Neill. I coach top-level executives on the power of ethical leadership to forge teams to be as united as they are effective. In each episode, join me for insightful conversations with leaders just like you, providing practical advice to help you get unstuck and propel you and your company forward. Let's get started. Joining me is Tanya Turner. Tanya is the Director of Human Resources for Salto Systems. In this role, she provides strategic and executive leadership across all HR disciplines within their North American business unit. Tanya describes herself as an HR leader who puts the human in human resources. Tanya is also an introvert. I read a recent article in the Harvard Business Review, and it was entitled, "Introverts Can Be Leaders Too." We all know they can, but why do we tend to treat introverts differently? That's what I'm going to ask Tanya to kind of share her perspective on, and that is, what would be a perspective that an introverted HR leader bring to her role there at Salto Systems? Welcome, Tanya.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here today to talk to you.
You know, Tanya, I'm also reminded you also host your own podcast, do you not?
I do. I have a podcast that I started probably after the death of our dad, because I have a brother. It's probably been a year ago. So it was something that I've always wanted to do. So just like you, I'm out here striving and thriving to do something different. So yes, I do have my own podcast called the Tanya Turner Podcast.
Well, I want to commend it to those who are listening in on this podcast. One reason I wanted to kind of have this conversation is I don't think it's right, but there's a tendency because extroverts assume they're best suited for leadership. And I think we all can think of examples where introverts are as, if not more, effective. But as an introvert, why don't we first kind of define the term? You're an introverted HR leader. What is it about your natural God-given gift of being an introvert that prepares you well to be an HR leader?
Well, I'm going to take a step back. I did not understand, Mike, what an introvert was until I actually started really studying what it actually looks like. And of course, we take all of these assessments, right? And then with those assessments, they don't have context. And then you don't know what that means when it applies to you. So when I think about being an introvert, I get my power, I get my creativity, my innovation from alone time, decompression, processing, pausing. Oh, that gift of pause is so important. And really realizing about my social barometer. So that was foundation for me. What changed me is somebody gave me a book about the introverted leader by Jennifer Conwheeler. And I hope I pronounced that correctly. And I started reading up about the introverted leader. And I said, this book resonates with me as a person because it started giving language to something that I could not really identify before. Now, if you are leading people, processes, or doing anything, you are a leader. We don't necessarily have to have a title to be a leader. But what I found is in these spaces with other extroverts of how I can actually leverage my introverted spirit, my introverted approach to things, and not have to be like groupthink in the room. And that's what has made me be successful, is that I'm learning how to harness, to stir up my gifts, my talents, my approaches, the fact that I'm not quick to make a decision, that I think through it, that I'm very methodical, and harnessing those approaches to be a leader. And when I think about a leader is not perfect. A leader is a person too that understands and they are self-aware. And I'm very much self-aware about that part of my life.
We talk about self-awareness and how important it is for everybody, but particularly from a leader's perspective. Put your HR director hat on. When you're working with a leader who does not have self-awareness, in what ways might he or she not be as effective?
Well, one thing, I'm a reader. So, and I think you are too, Mike. So I have always loved the book Emotional Intelligence. Mm-hmm. And one of the key areas there is about self-awareness. So when I think about self-awareness, to thy own self be true. If you know something about yourself and you can harness that in situations, you will be a better leader as a result of it. Maybe you are a leader that you process out loud, or you may not have patience, or maybe you're not good with this, or you're better with that. When you have those factors or that information, it makes for you to better be able to show up in the room. And so when you have a person who is not self-aware, that maybe they come across or they may be harsh or very direct, that if you don't dig into that directness of where it comes from and maybe checking yourself when you are talking to someone to let them know, guess what? I'm very direct, but my directness has nothing and little to do about the situation and more to investigate to get to the other side. So it's really doing a lot of introspection and a lot of your shadow work. And when you do that shadow work, when you show up in spaces, whether it's at work or at home, personal or professional, that you're more self-aware of those feelings, approaches, methodologies, and then you could check them before they are unchecked and they can bleed into something that is more of an ego-based approach to how you do things. So I think that self-awareness is so key. I'm always chin-checking myself about, could I have handled that better? And that to me is very self-aware, because when you lack self-awareness, you never ask yourself that question. Is there a way I could have handled that better? Because you feel as if you cannot be corrected. And that to me is not the mark of a true leader or striving to be a good person,
When you were describing that, what came immediately to mind is my work as a coach. One of the first things I do when I begin working with a new client is we spend time with the client, them getting understanding of themselves.
Yeah.
How are they naturally inclined, such that they have that self-awareness about who they are and how they prefer to operate. In some cases, we compared that to how they're perceived by others, because sometimes there's a disconnect. We started this conversation, and Tanya, I just jumped right into introversion, extroversion, and I'm making the assumption that people know what we're talking about. But can I at least clarify, is if a person is naturally extroverted, that describes me. I'm an extrovert, which means I tend to get my energy from others, and I feed on others. It doesn't necessarily mean, though, that I'm always an extrovert. There are times that I need quiet time. And particularly for me as an extrovert, my quiet time is oftentimes in a natural setting. I'm in the woods. I'm on a hike. I'm on a run. That is alone time. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm an introvert, but there are times where I need to use my extroversion, and there are times I can back off. Can that also be said for introverts? Introverts who might naturally be a little more reserved in certain settings can assert if needed, and do so very effectively. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit on what I'm trying to say in terms of what that means to you as an introverted HR leader? At what times do you need to kind of assert and maybe be perceived more extroverted?
Yeah, I feel like as an introverted leader, it doesn't mean that I don't have extroverted tendencies. Sometimes I can be an ambivert, and that is I flex my style, But I didn't really realize that, Mike, about flexing my style until I started really digging deep into what it means to be introverted versus extroversion. So for myself, like you talked a little bit about the quiet time and the perception. So the perception is oftentimes for an introvert, you may be in a room, picture this, of a lot of extroverts, and you're the only introvert there. And someone is asking you about pie charts, data, answers. There are times where preparation for me is so key. So it's nice to have a meeting agenda before I go into the meeting. So if I need to have facts, figures, data, that I can actually research a little bit, but sometimes things happen where there's no time for that. So you leverage your expertise. But introversion, I flex because I have to present like this is an extroverted activity for me, which I feel that I am ready for, but I also did prepare.
Mm-hmm.
But for individuals such as that, quiet time is not always an introversion perspective. It's just when they get their ideas, their creativity, their recharge. They too like to go into nature. But I think that there is the perception gap that that person is not engaged, or that they seem to be aloof, or they don't want to go to the next level. It's not about those things. It's how they process being in those social environments, because my social barometer works completely different than everyone else's. Maybe I'm taxed for that day and I've had a lot of social activity, conversations. My social barometer will tell me, note to self, will we be staying for the 3 hours that this event is taking place? And my introverted self says as such, no, we won't. We only have an hour to give, because there's something that happens for me in my mind where I could become overwhelmed with a lot of social interaction. But that doesn't make me less effective because I've done a lot of social things. It's just that I understand that in order to be my best self, that this is what I have to give energy management wise per day. So I hope that that makes sense. So when you show up in a room, you may be quiet because you are absorbing the energy in the room. First of all, you feel it. Is it safe? Have I met these people before? Maybe I'll do a little light conversation. Maybe I might write some things out that people said that I had questions about. So I'm doing a lot of observation than talking in the room. So that's how I look at the differentiation. Extroverts talk things out. Maybe introverts think of things, have introspection first, and then they talk them out. They don't do that before. They don't run down the hill. So it's just differences, but it's still commonality.
When we started this conversation, I wanted to make sure it's very, very clear. I want to reiterate that there is no position I'm taking here that one style is better than the other. We've clarified that we all, if we're going to be effective, we have to adapt to the circumstances. Introverts can do extroverted things and vice versa. But it's that notion of being yourself and embracing who you are. Matter of fact, that's what I kind of listed the topic to be, and that is being yourself. And I wanted to kind of get your idea, not only from the perspective of an introvert, but from an HR leader standpoint. You've been doing HR leadership for quite some time.
Yes.
When you think about how people are looking to you as an HR leader, what are they looking for that connotes that you're effective as an HR leader?
Well, first of all, I think being in HR for quite some time, HR is not for the faint-hearted, Mike. You already probably know that. Is that I feel that the best way to be an effective HR leader is to have credibility, that you do have the know-how, the foundation to do the job. But what makes you accelerate your effectiveness is your ability to connect with other people. And when they see, where you read a little bit about putting the human into human resource, I know that sounds so cliche, but it's really not. I'm having a human experience just like everyone else. I have my highs, my lows, my in-betweens, my successes and my failures. And when people can really relate to you and identify with you, that's when you start to build trust and camaraderie. And they're not just coming past your desk to say, hey, can I get that form? Can I get this? Can you help me with this leave of absence? They're coming back to actually talk about how they're doing, which it takes a lot of work and effort. So kind of demystifying like what HR actually looks like in order to be most effective in this role is I have to be, and I want to be, and I should be relational. And what that means is that you see people in every wake of their life where they're having a child, they're getting promoted, they lost a mother, they're looking to grow their career, they're at a peak in their career. And these are all the ebbs and flows of life. But guess what? HR is going through those things as well. Mm-hmm. And so in order to be most effective is to continue to strive to be relational. And the one thing, like I always have this shirt on today about remember your why. My why every day is to get up every day and to be authentically myself. I don't want to be like anybody else. I may glean things that I like about that person. But in order to be most effective, people like to talk to real people that are really out here adulting and lifing. And that would what you could do from an HR standpoint to help people along the way.
You're sharing your why and the importance of remembering your why. And relational is the word that you use 2 or 3 times here. And that is, at least in my experience, people can pick up if it's not real or not, can they not?
They can.
Okay. And therefore, genuinely being who you are, trying to address whatever issue they have and understand it from their perspective. It seems all too often people just want to be heard. Mm-hmm. And to be heard, me, the extrovert, has to stop talking. Yeah. And I would suspect you as a natural introvert, you probably heard it before I did because you've got a sense for it. I asked what qualities are employees looking for in an HR leader from your perspective. I think you reported into the president of your business unit. What is the C-suite looking for when it comes to HR leaders?
I would say a person that can support people and culture, who has the blended ability to flex between the strategic, and sometimes our roles all require some tactical, but really focusing on the around the corner moments, understanding the business, so having increased business acumen. And with that increased business acumen, you could better prepare for a lot of things: workforce planning, hiring, promoting, talent conversations. So when I think about HR professionals from the business standpoint, is strategy, the ability to be a great partner, sound collaboration, which means that you can work with everybody and anybody, that you can integrate anywhere and everywhere, that you are a business partner because you know about the products and services that you sell, and that which you don't know, Mike, you're always searching and acquiring knowledge, because business doesn't stay the same. It's just like we talk about self-awareness. Businesses do SWOT analysis too about their strengths, their areas of development. So always understanding the business. They want a person who is intellectually curious, that will ask questions. To not ask questions is a disservice to yourself. It's an example would be if you're using an acronym and I'm sitting there like, yeah, I don't understand what that is. It's just being able to be courageous, have courageous leadership to ask those questions, because I pretty much think that somebody else in the room has those questions. And like I said, these are just a couple, but not all. Relational is very important. Relational being, if you're touching something from an HR standpoint, not only do you have to have the knowledge in HR, like the bodice, it's nice to have credentials and certification. But if you have that experience where you can lead the business and mitigate that risk and navigate and still think about the duality of the business as well as the individual, is a great balance to have. Now, while I've mentioned a couple of things, that's not everything, but those are the things that resonate top of mind.
You know, when we were talking before scheduling this recording, we discussed several possible topics. I wanted to start from the perspective of who you are, how you're naturally wired, and how you've embraced that to be an effective leader. I kind of like to move into another area, and that is I bring up HR. That's kind of my background, as you well know, but it seems as if there's a lot of misunderstanding about HR. And one of the things we talked about is what is it that we could talk about that would open up people's eyes about HR? And said differently, if you were to give an opportunity to demystify HR, what might be the things that you would share with our viewers and listeners that would help open up their eyes to HR?
Well, HR definitely is not the Green Mile. It's not just a place where people get hired and fired. HR is a firm foundation when I think about #BetterMe, which means training and development, coaching, 360 coaching, feedback, the 70-20-10. On the job learning is the 70%, the 20% is the coaching and the feedback, the mentors, and the 10% is the training. It is really taking an introspection from within to really start thinking about, if you started your role, what are my gifts and my talents? Some people really don't know what they are until they've been exercised and they've been exposed. And so let me share with you, not exposed to the degree like, Mike, this is your talent. No, it's like, I did not know that I have this gift. So an example would be when I first started in HR, I knew nothing about HR. What I knew about was customer service. And so I was like, well, HR is not a place that you really want to go, because that's the stories that I've heard. But then I started realizing as I got into HR, my manager put me into new hire orientation. And while I had my degree in journalism, I still was, I didn't have the confidence and the wherewithal about doing training and developing. And she saw something in me, and she was in HR. And what she did is she multiplied it. She put me in that space, gave me fertile soil. Because when you think about good seed planted in good soil, can't be planted in soil that's not good, because it will not sprout. It will not grow. It will not grow into this beautiful oak, sturdy tree unless you have a person who is willing to not only just plant good seeds, but to water it, to look at the environment, to control, to pre-plan. And when I think about the role of human resources, I think that it's not seen as, it's like paper pushing, personnel, people. I tell you what to do, you're an order taker. It's far from that. It is life impacting. It is a place that you can go and you can leave out a different version of yourself. It's rediscovering that, you know what? I'm seen, I'm heard, I matter. What I'm bringing to the table is unlike anything else that anybody else can bring. And what they're also seeing is that if you happen to be an introvert, that you can leverage that in the appropriate way. Like, how do you navigate the nuances of when your introverted spirit or your introvert soul is in spaces and you're overwhelmed? How can you leverage that through presentation when you get nervous? Because we all get nervous. How can you make that work for yourself? So when I think about HR, I want to take away the thing and say HR stands for home run, right? Which means you're going to hit a home run if you swim in your lane, be who you're supposed to be, and what they're supposed to do is cultivate that out of you. And that cultivation is different and situational for every individual. That's what I think of human resources. That is life impacting, life altering. It starts from the start of when we recruit you to when you are here in the organization, and what is the residue that we leave when you decide to go somewhere else. We hope you don't go anywhere else, but if you're growing your career, not a job, that sometimes that means you do leave. And you know what? We celebrate your career endeavors, because when you look back, you can actually say to yourself, I really got a lot out of being in that space with that person and at that organization.
Yeah, Tanya, as you're helping us demystify HR, would you be willing to share an example about in your own life where perhaps you got stuck? And when that happened, what did you do to get unstuck?
Well, I'm gonna take it all the way back when I first got into human resources. I always wanted to go back to school to get my MBA, but at that time, I'm a single mother, and I was saying to myself, I don't know if I could really afford to go back, or do I have the time to go back? And I was stuck because what I wanted to do was further my education and possibly get my PHR and some additional credentials, but I wasn't sure if I was making the right decision. From a financial perspective, was I just doing it just to be doing it, or was I doing it for the marketability? So I started just kind of researching what made sense to me. And what I started to realize when I first registered for class, I was like, wow, I became unstuck. Mike, when I realized I went to school at the perfect time. Because if I had gone to school prior to, I didn't have the experience personally and professionally. I didn't have the maturity. And when I talk about maturity, I'm talking about the experiences to help sustain you when you do go to school. You have relevant examples, you're more mature, your writing style is more foundational. You understand about audience, you understand about tweaking, you understand about how to write your papers because you've had that experience doing it and you've had the course correction. So when I went back to school and I was able to do that, I became unstuck because I was like, I love learning. I realized that, and I love sharing my learnings with other individuals. So I was stuck in the fact that I thought that I was limited about what I could do. My mindset wasn't looking around the corner of me getting my diploma or what it could afford for me. I was just in the right now, like, oh, I should just keep my hand down. I should just doing this. That's a lot of work. But sometimes greatness, sometimes blooming. Remember, we talked about that soil, sometimes expanding your reach and having those root systems that where you're reaching for the water, for the additional, is that will require for you to be a different version of yourself. I'm so grateful that people encouraged me to do it. I'm grateful that people supported me while I was doing it. And I'm even equally happy that my daughter saw that I could do it and she watched me walk across the stage to get my degree. And what it shows is perseverance and also belief in yourself and believing who you are. That to me can get you unstuck. And it's nothing like having foundation of people who believe in you. That's so important. It's so key.
I love what you said, and that is to get unstuck, you have to believe in yourself, to believe who you are. And there are times you just need perseverance to power through it. We've been talking about the profession of HR. Yes, we do have a lot of HR leaders who listen to this podcast, but we also have business owners and business leaders who are saying, I'd like to be able to embrace HR in new ways. From that perspective, if you are advising a business leader about how they can utilize HR in new ways that really add value, what would you encourage them to start doing?
I would encourage them to start inviting human resources to the table more often when they're making decisions. A different perspective can offer greater reward. HR is not like the door stopper in the door, like, oh, I'm just here to, it's not that. It has so much value. Just like we talked about when the plant is watered, you will get so much far greater return. So number one, inviting your HR team to the table where it's normal, it's natural, it's a part of the DNA that person is invited to every meeting because they touch a lot of your human capital, which is a great portion of the reason why you are in business. And to me, I feel that managers and business owners should start socializing the many benefits that HR offers and allowing individuals to understand the plethora of resources, i.e. employee assistance programs. How do you get promoted? Allowing HR to do more of the teaching. So it'll be more relational. And then also supporting them when they're doing the employee engagement activities, the bowling events, the spotlights, celebrating the moments, whatever that looks like, and become more of an advocate and developing more trust with your HR professionals and finding out how you can have commonality. I did not say that we're going to always agree, but when you want to have a person in the room that's not always saying yes and to challenge you of your perspective and still leave the relationship intact with respect. So I say invite them in early and often. I say have a great relationship. Encourage your staff to go speak to human resources. Because when you're being a good leader, you should have no problem with somebody saying, I can't believe that you went and spoke to HR. Like that's a place where they're not supposed to go and speak about certain things. It should be like, I welcome you to go speak to HR because guess what? If I am doing everything that I'm supposed to be doing and I am being a good leader, and what that means is I'm doing the right thing. I'm treating people fair. I'm treating them consistently. I'm speaking to people with kindness and respect. I'm treating people like they are seen, valued, heard. I am maximizing your career. I'm not just doing it for one person that I like. I'm doing it for everybody. Even the person who's not doing so well, they can have a turnaround too. So it's really looking at human resources differently, not through rose-colored glasses, not through the bad experiences that you had, but through a totally different lens of inclusion and belonging.
I'm sitting here just smiling because not only did your eyes light up, your whole demeanor lit up when I asked the unscripted question, what should leaders be doing, key leaders, to better utilize HR? And you gave us some great examples. We've had a pretty far-ranging conversation. It started off about how does an introverted HR leader embrace that and be effective? And you pointed out how that would work. We talked about how to demystify what HR is all about. And we kind of closed with why HR can be an integral part, why they should be at the table, and that by doing so, it can make a huge difference in getting the right things done in the organization. As you kind of reflect on what we've talked about in this conversation, what do you want to be the takeaways?
Yes, that was a lot of good information. Here's a couple of things that I want to take away or share with your listeners is that wherever you go, the one thing that I encourage everyone to do, and this is not just about HR speak, this is just about who you are as a person. I encourage you to stir up your unique gifts and talents. I encourage you to swim in the lane that you were designated to swim because the only person who could do it would be you. An open mind is not going to open or walk through a closed door. So you have to keep your mind open about the possibilities of things that you would never think that you can do. Here's a couple of hashtags that I want to leave you with, and a couple of other thoughts is basically hashtag bloom, because you always got to be blooming. Hashtag growth mindset, because if you do your introspection work and your shadow work, you will be better than you were yesterday, tomorrow, next year, and even the month after. And get into the thought process that when you think about yourself, that I matter, meaning I'm never going to settle for mediocrity in my life. Remember, I talked about going back to school. I had to remember I'm allergic to average. I want to be better than I was yesterday. And I'm also allergic to being mediocre. So even if I made a mistake, maybe today was not a great day, I gave it 2,000%. So again, nobody can do what you do. Every person in the organization, even if you have your own business, they matter. Look for those rising stars, water that individual because they will never forget how much you poured into them. They will always remember that somebody saw them, saw the best in them, not the mistakes in them. Not because you thought they did mediocre work, but you saw rising potential.
So beautifully said. Thank you so much for sharing not only your expertise, but just who you are naturally. And the passion comes through loud and clear. Thanks again.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you.
I've got a question for our listeners. Are people following you because they have to or because they want to? As a leadership coach, I work with executives who have a track record of success behind them, but they're now feeling stuck. They're frustrated because they're finding that with each level of success that follows, the bar is set even higher. They're discouraged because what worked in the past is no longer working. So I have found that my clients, despite all of their success in the past, they're lacking the clarity and the confidence to make the decisions needed to get to that next level. So if feeling stuck describes you or someone you know, let's talk. Head over to bench-builders.com to schedule a call. So I want to thank you again for joining us, and I hope you have picked up on some quick wins from Tanya that will help you get unstuck and on target. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Get Unstuck and On Target. I hope you've gained insights to help you lead with confidence and drive your organization forward. Remember, at Bench Builders, we're committed to your success, your leadership excellence, and your strategic growth. If you've enjoyed our conversation today, please leave a review, rate, and subscribe to keep up with our latest episodes. This show really grows when listeners like you share it with others. Who do you know who needs to hear what we talked about today? Until next time, I encourage you to stay focused on the target and continue to break new ground on your leadership path.